I have, oh, thank you. I'm sorry, Amy. We will be recording this. So yes, if you heard that, the recording is in progress. So thank you, Amy, for that. I'm Zephyrin Hansen. I am based in Denver, Colorado. I have a 1/4 acre mini farm that I run with my partner and 3 children. And I also study value-added products in partnership with Denver Botanic Gardens, who is also in Denver. So that is just a tiny bit about me. And I am very excited to have Amber and Ariel share a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into the prompt. So I can see Amber. Do you mind going first, Amber?
No problem. Good evening, y'all. I'm Amber Tam. I'm a farm worker, horticulturalist, and floral designer. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, but via the Migrant Farm Trail, I've been allotted the real complexity of farming across the US, and ending back in urban environments in what I've harvested from across the US and being able to give back in that way. But most of my work is centered around farm worker rights, food sovereignty, and interweaving the healing modalities of earthwork for BIPOC communities, specifically ghetto communities.
Thank you, Amber. Ariel, when you're ready.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ariel Quintana. I am a tribal member from Cochiti Pueblo, which is located in New Mexico. We are one of the federally recognized tribes in the state. I am currently zooming in from Fort Collins, Colorado, which is on the ancestral homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota nations and peoples. I've been in agriculture, I've been in food systems since the day I could walk. I've been helping my family, my community with planting just traditional crops back in Cochiti. And so we have our own little plot of land down there where we're farming. And beyond that, in a more professional role, I've been in tribal natural resources, tribal food sovereignty, tribal systems for the past 10 years. And so most of my experience and most of my grounding in this space specifically is from a Pueblo, Native, and Indigenous lens and practice. And so my work has been around centering Indigenous peoples, being able to support and reaffirm tribal sovereignty in relationship to land stewardship, in relationship to food systems. And yeah, just really excited to be able to be here today and get to enjoy this conversation with you all.
Thank you, Ariel. So I want to acknowledge that we are all coming from this from different perspectives, but it is really a space to hear Amber and Ariel and the communities that they represent and their part they're experiencing. And I say that because depending upon our privilege, we will hear only the hard work we've had to do, and it can be sometimes hard to see where someone else is. So I wanted to frame that. I also want to acknowledge that I didn't do a land acknowledgement, and it's not, and I want to acknowledge that we are on land that is not ours, while also acknowledging that I am in the space of being from ancestors who were stolen and brought to this land. And so as I'm looking for land access and equity for myself, I also acknowledge that the tribes and family who this is their actual land are still doing the same thing. I don't have the answers, but it's very important to speak truth to what we are facing and why this is so difficult. So I'm here for the discomfort. Like I am leaning into the work we do have ahead of us, but I believe if we look at it head on, that we can come up with some solutions. The prompt for this conversation, and I want to thank both of my panelists for sharing their thoughts and input on this, is the question is, what's coming up for you today about land access and land equity, oppression and liberation. And we have just about 20 minutes to get into that. There's a lot there, but I want to open this opportunity to either one of you who want to take it first. You have you're green, Ariel.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Yeah, you're green.
I'm happy to start first. So today, actually just coming out of a summit here in Fort Collins at Colorado State University around grassland conservation. And so I'm currently attending the Central Grasslands Roadmap Summit and had a lot of really interesting conversations today about what does grassland conservation mean, who gets to participate in defining what our goals and strategies are around that, and just a lot of different pieces. And today what's coming up for me is feeling this real need to acknowledge that when we're talking about Indigenous producers, when we're talking about Indigenous peoples, Indigenous farmers, Indigenous ranchers, that we are, and we're talking generally, I think it's just about food and agriculture, that we're always lumped together with other types of ranchers, other types of land stewards, and yet we're inherently different, because as Indigenous peoples, especially here in the United States, we are, and if we have the privilege of being federally recognized by the US government, we are sovereign nations. And so we are rights holders in this space, and we're not a stakeholder. And so federal government, state governments, other entities who are working on lands, they should be, and most of them are, required to consult with tribes on any projects that they're doing that impacts lands that we have ancestral ties to, and acknowledging that all lands in the US are stolen lands, that we have ties to all of these spaces. And so there should always be at least one tribe who's always engaging in conversations like around grassland conservation, around land stewardship, around food systems. And yet that's really not the case most of the time. And I find myself today really wanting to acknowledge that lately in the food and agriculture fields and sectors, like this push for regenerative agriculture, this push for reciprocity, this push for relationship building and trust building, and all of these different pieces of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really burdensome on women of color. And it's really burdensome on, speaking for me, myself as an Indigenous woman, it is such tiring work. And today I found myself trying to balance, to expend so much energy and time towards the summit, because I get into this mode of well, they need to hear it from someone, and I'm here, and I have the privilege of being in this space, knowing that there's not enough other Native people here that I'm going to say it, and that gets tiring. And then also having to continually remind people about what each of those different terms means for us as women of color. And so, and also us as Indigenous peoples, and that a lot of those are co-opted, a lot of those are misappropriated, a lot of those are stolen knowledges and ways of life from Indigenous peoples, from Black people, from Brown people. And yeah, and that just continues to happen over time. And so the hard work that gets done by our people, by our women, it's invisibilized and it's erased, and it's called something different. And it's called regenerative agriculture now, or it's called relationship building, or it's called DEI. And those are all things that I hold dearly as an Indigenous woman, that I truly understand the weight of what it means to say that you are in relationship and in responsibility to and with the land, and how that happens both ways, and how it's not just you returning to the land because you recognize it gives to you. It's about also acknowledging that when you're a steward of the land, you're a steward of things much more than that, and that you are a protector and a defender of your animal relatives, of your plant relatives, of the natural processes that run this planet. And at the end of the day, like, the law that we follow is natural law, it's natural order. And it's the ways in which we support the earth in doing what she knows to do, and how our job isn't to do anything else beyond that. And that's for somehow that huge worldview has been siphoned down and funneled into what we call regenerative agriculture. And we think that we can just say, like, no, you just return to the land what it gives to you, that still represents this breadth of viewing the world. And it does it a huge injustice. And that gets really tiring and frustrating to see and to hear. And for a big piece that I'm starting to recognize more for myself is how I'm getting really frustrated with the way in which we talk about reciprocity in this space, and how that's become a really huge term that I hear from a lot of people, of reciprocal relationships, of being in reciprocity with people. And most of the time it's used in a context of, just at that one space and time that I'm engaging in a reciprocal relationship with you in this partnership right now. And, as an Indigenous person who understands reciprocity, who practices it, I know that when I say I'm in reciprocity with someone, with the community, that's lifelong. That's not just for this next year, for the long as this project runs. That's not just 5 years, that's lifelong. That means that if I go into a community and if I say, I'm here for you, that I'm there for them. No strings attached. That if they say, hey, come, I need some help doing this, that I'll say, all right, I'll be there in 30 minutes. I'll be there in an hour. And it's about showing up for those challenging conversations. And it's about showing up in those spaces where it is scary to take a stand. And it can be really intimidating to support someone with that much, I want to call it love, with that much love in you, that you're going to continually always show up for them. And yeah, people throw around and use the term reciprocity too lightly, where they don't fully understand and appreciate the deepness of that commitment, of that dedication that you should be offering to that other person who's receiving it, to those relationships, and not only to people, but also to the land. And so there's a lot of things that are coming up for me today, but for me, those are the main things that are coming up.
Well, I took notes, but I want to ask the same prompt to you, Amber, is what is coming up for you today about land access, land equity, oppression, and liberation?
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot towards those things because I think I'm very much so in the midst of the harsh realities of all of those concepts. And I think that's exactly where I want to start. Is I think a lot of the work that we've been doing has been language based and has been conceptualized. And I really feel like it's absolutely way past time of conceptualizing and talking and moving into a space of commitment and implementing. And I think that's our biggest holdup right now, is like, we are not fully committed and we're not fully implementing. We're still in this realm of trying to define things and create things digitally. And this is probably the only work left that isn't digital. So I just want to first name that, like, that is one of the biggest mishaps that I think I fell into as a youth. So just wanted to name that first. But I think in my travels on the migrant farm trail, I think the first thing that I realized is, well, one, I'm a Black and Indigenous American citizen. So for me to be on the migrant farm trail was it was a whirlwind to be working with folks who might identify as undocumented, but to work with those folks in that realm and to see how they were being treated and to be treated as such with them. That's really where the beginning of my advocacy started, is utilizing the little privilege that I have as a Black being to support folks that were absolutely being treated as outcasts. But one of the first things I noticed is that most of the time when it comes to land, the person who owns the land actually doesn't even have the knowledge. It's actually all of the farm workers who know how to work the land and have the true magical powers of being able to move to any piece of land and create that harmony with it anywhere that they go. So I think that's another thing that I've noticed, not only in terms of land acquisition or any of those labels, but also in terms of just like knowledge shares. Like, we're still in a realm where digitally there are people speaking on behalf of farmers. And that's just a part of this conceptualization that we have to depart from. I also think that in this particular box of the migrant farm trail, there is a disposition that's coming alive where I think the migrant farm trail, where most of our food comes from, is a front line in itself. And I don't mean to use war terms, but it really is like a front line on multiple levels that I won't get into. But then I think there's this other front line that was like the organic hippie back to land movement. And so I just want to also name the different varieties of agriculture that are alive right now, and the fact that there is no unity between those movements. And so that's something else with land access that I think can form if given the right stance for it. I think for me in particular, on a personal level, I'm nearing a time of like really intense, like burning out to a point of really questioning if I should continue. Because I started farming when I was 18 and I'm 27 now. So I've spent all of my youth giving my time and my days to this movement and never reaping the benefit. I've never had a positive experience on a farm. I've never had a family. I've never had access to a piece of land to be able to farm the way that I know that we're supposed to be working with land. I've never had a chance to bring my family onto the piece of land in which I've worked. And I've never lived on a farm and had, appropriate, proper amenities in terms of bathroom, in terms of room. So I think that's like what I'm standing in, and that really alludes to the fact of housing. And I think that's something we're not talking a lot about within the farm context. I, for the first time, am going on, ATRA internships or good food jobs and seeing that there's a lot of farm jobs that don't have farm housing. And it's really perplexing me as to how we're going to keep welcoming youth like myself when I was 18, welcoming youth into this work and orienting them, saying that this work is the future, when there really isn't any sustainability to it. Starting with, there's not even a place for the young person to reside to have access to the farm. So if we're all knowledgeable that farms are in rural spaces, and we're all knowledgeable of what the person that's, I don't know, 16 to 25 is really going through in terms of finances, then how do we integrate more housing narratives into this topic that is land access? Now, outside of this one context that is like welcoming folks for internships or, part-time farm jobs, there's a bigger context of, well, even if we take the very talented farmers that are on the migrant farm trail, they've been making, I don't even know, on the migrant farm trail, I was making $60 a week for over 70 hours of work. So if we have all of us who have been working the land saying that we want land, what does that even look like? Because we haven't had a savings. We haven't had any type of donor backing or anything like that. So what does it even look like for a farm worker to transition into a farm owner? And knowing the difficulties in that process, whether that's language, whether that's income, whether that's housing, and not knowing there really isn't anyone here speaking about the transition into going from a farm worker into a farm owner. And I just want to name that this is like the trickiest, hardest shit that I've ever been through in my life. Like, I'm a very strong person, but this is like one of the hardest things I've went through in my life. So I feel like I really just want to speak to that narrative of these are the things that nobody prepared me for. And so these are the things that come up when I think of all of these words. I think lastly, I had mentioned this before, but I'm also deeply curious about the exchanges that can happen between Black farmers and Indigenous landholders, and wondering what that relationship can be like so that Black farmers can have their reparations that they've been asking the government for so long, which the USDA absolutely admitted to in 2020, while continuing to create this unity between both people who have suffered from the same experiences under the oppression of white supremacy. So I'll leave it there, but those were some of the coordinates that came up for me.
Absolutely. First, I thank both of you for sharing your experiences and your vulnerability. What I heard is that there's a lot of words. There's just a lot of words right now. And what we need is implementation, like real ways to implement facilitating Black and Indigenous relationships that are mutually beneficial around land, and to also the work of being an Indigenous and Black woman and continuing to show up in spaces. And so not my question, but I guess my takeaway from what both of you are saying, and of course either one of you can speak to this, is that we're stagnant. What we're doing is not sustainable. There's movement, but nobody is going anywhere. And especially speaking to housing, this is a challenge that we're having right here in Denver of getting farms, but not having housing for the youth that we want. And can farming, is farming truly sustainable under all the things we're doing right now? What I'm hearing is that it is not, and that we have to do something different. And I'm also hearing that this is who we are. Like, we're tied to the land. We are tied to true reciprocity, but it doesn't go both ways. So, I mean, there was a lot said. Am I correct in what I heard, Amber, as far as burnout? If you're there, Amber, you can't fix it, of course, overnight, but does it really just come down to that we need this money, we need this funding, we need this land? Because no matter what we're doing, there's not movement. And especially hearing you say that you're questioning, can you stay here? And after, nearly a decade of your life, what would allow for you to stay? What would allow for you to be able to want other youth to come? Because that's where we are, that we have this conversation, we take them this information, and if someone is not listening what the two of you are saying, then they most definitely don't have reciprocity. They are not community weavers, and it's to move past them, because you truly have the answer.
Yeah, I think I think the complexity really lives in the fact that if you are a person who wasn't born into land access on any level, that really leaves you with two options, which is to take the USDA route, which is to take out a loan for farmland, or there's the other route, which is to base it all on philanthropy. And I think those being the only two options for young farmers, I think it's time for folks to get creative about what actual land access should look like. I don't know. As somebody who's been on the farming front lines, I don't know. And that I think that's really the problem, is that the farmer is supposed to be the person that's tending the land, or so that's how capitalism has shifted it, is that the farmer is just this person focused on the relationship with the land. But I think what folks aren't aware of, especially folks that have only been in the positionality of a farm worker, is all that land access holds, the paperwork, the amount of knowledge, grants, all the things. But I think
it's a full-time professional job. You're an executive director. I recently did a project and we were studying Fannie Lou Hamer, and I know the knowledge is kept from us on purpose, but I really did not feel smart once I realized, like, this woman was an executive director, a politician, a farmer. She did admin. I mean, like, her skills set to do all that she was able to do, and yet she didn't have the support to do that, and it was still required of her. And then when the Freedom Farm Cooperative, and if you do not know Fannie Lou Hamer, please study her and Google her. But she was key in voting rights in 1964, and she founded the Freedom Farm Cooperative, and she also co-founded the Freedom Democratic Party. I may be incorrect, but please. And she essentially had a cooperative, and she was an executive director before anybody was called that. And like I said, a politician, and she endured all kinds of abuse at the hands of America while just wanting to feed poor people, period, but through Black leadership. So that, what you're speaking to about the work of just what it takes to have land access and to have equity, there's so much paperwork that goes behind it. And then, go ahead. I'm sorry, Amber.
Yes, the only thing I was going to end with is, well, then you have young people like myself who are walking into this hoping to help their communities, but our brain just fully developed. To put it simply, like, our brain literally just fully developed. And then if you take it a step further and move it out of the context of just young farmers, but then you take it into, I won't speak on behalf of all people of color. I will just center it on Black and Indigenous folks. When you bring it into that context, Black and Indigenous young land stewards, there's a whole other thing going on, because the oppression that we were put under and are still under has limited us even having some type of clear understanding of what the system actually is. So how I always frame it is that the strategy was to block us, and that has successfully been happening. The question now has to be, what are we willing to do to actually implement what we're wanting to see beyond facilitating conversations, beyond language-based things? But just knowing that everything that just happened to Fannie Lou Hamer, whoever your local Black and Indigenous farmer is, they're going through the same thing Fannie Lou Hamer went through. There's no difference. Like, the same thing is consistently happening for all Black and Indigenous farmers right now, unless they somehow have ties to large amounts.
No, you're correct. And I think that's, for me, what was, again, I know it's by design, but not understanding that. I am also a veteran of the Air Force, and it's what I needed to do as a young person. That's a whole nother conversation of how, you have college and access and the things you can do in America. But it is mind-blowing to me that I could die for America before I had voting rights. And yet things are still the same. That's what my point, and thank you, Amber, for bringing that, I was raised to believe that things were changing. The clothing are changing. That's it. The same thing that's under it is alive and well and expanding. And that is not something that I'm okay with. So I too don't have the answers, Amber, Ariel, because I'm like, this is not what I thought, not what I thought what farming was. So Ariel, for what I heard, Amber, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? I want to make sure that perfect. Ariel, what I heard you talk about is the amount of work that falls at your lap and my lap and Amber's lap, and just that's not okay. And not that it is again, it's a similar question. There's not other than, I feel like I'm answering my own question, I apologize, but how would you like to see people who are saying reciprocity? Well, matter of fact, can you define it? Can you define how you define reciprocity as opposed to what's received? If I look at my notes, I would remember that. Thank you. The reciprocity is so how you define reciprocity and the way it feels good to you, and then how you often receive it, what that definition is.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So for me, I will go towards my other Indigenous scholars and the way that they've defined reciprocity, and some of my mentors also. Reciprocity means being in a cyclical relationship with another being. And I say being intentionally because it's not necessarily just humans, it's not necessarily just people. It includes your relationship to land, to animals, to water, to air, to earth. And that in that cyclical relationship, it's lifelong. That it spans your entire lifetime and also gets passed on to your younger generations. That it is the way in which you operate in the world. And in that cyclical relationship, it's not always an equal give or take. That at any moment that it can be unequal, that maybe you give here, and the understanding is that later when that being needs your help, that it will ask that of you. And then that's how you return. And so it's not necessarily like you give something and therefore you should receive it immediately. It doesn't happen in that. Because it's lifelong, that means that it can happen at any point in time. And so one person, one or more beings in that relationship you may owe them a favor is a way to, I guess, another way to frame it. And you don't always ask of that favor in that immediate time, but maybe it's later. And so that's that whole idea of, hey, I need help right now. Can you come and do this with me? And it's essentially doing everything you can to be that support and to provide that level of commitment and dedication and empathy and love and compassion in those moments.
And so you said that when there's other organizations who use that, what do they think reciprocity means, or how it comes off to you? Like I hear your definition and that resonates. I want to, they're using the same word, but what are their actions?
Yeah, to them, reciprocity means, hey, we're going to give you funding to do this. And in return, we'd like to have access. And in return, we'd like to have, and that access looks in a lot of different ways. And a lot of times the way I see it used is we want to have access to your people, and we want to have access to your knowledges, and when we want to have access to your lands, and we want to be the vehicle driving and we want you to get on board and we'll lead the whole way. but we're giving you funding, or we're giving you this expertise, or we're giving you this technical assistance without any real conversation, without any real relationship of, what do you want? No real acknowledgement of, we want to follow your lead. There's no shifting of that power to that other party. And it's always coming from this place that feels very self-centered. It feels pretty arrogant. That's really harmful. That, for me, really continues to perpetuate white saviorism. And so it distorts it, and it makes reciprocity look transactional, and as opposed to it being cyclical. And to them, it means like, we do one good thing and that's it. And we don't need to do anything else because we're in reciprocity. We did the thing, but not understanding that it's not transactional, and that there is a longevity towards it. And honestly, for me, have been trying to be very adamant that you can't use the word reciprocity. You can't say reciprocal relationships unless you understand that it's a lifelong commitment that you're willing to make. And you can have relationships that aren't reciprocal. There's nothing bad with that. Maybe it's just a one-time thing, and not everyone can give that level of commitment to everyone in their life, and everyone who they interact with, and that's fine. But just be mindful that it's not reciprocity that you're doing. And just be mindful of like, this is the way that I can show up for you right now. And maybe further down the line, when I'm better situated, I'll be able to actually engage in reciprocity with you. But for now, this is the way I can show up. And that's perfectly fine.
Thank you. Thank you for both of those the definition in which you've actually been experiencing, because that is something I hear in many of the same spaces, and it doesn't look like that. So this has been so insightful to me, and I hope to everyone watching, because I continue to learn. Every day I'm continuing to learn. I believe that we have some time for questions, if anyone had questions, and I would ask if both of you feel comfortable, if you have any parting thoughts or actually you've actually left us with all that you need. But if you had anything that you're like, I would like you to, if there's one thing you want to take away, please take this. And I genuinely thank you for showing up and sharing your experience and carrying this load that you shouldn't have to carry alone. But my hope is that what you share, at least for me, is a seed in how I can show up in this space and start to reframe all this talking, but actually implementing in where I can show up. That's definitely a question for myself, is what is something I can do right now? Something I can do right now to further this work I care about. And so, do we have any questions, Amy or Jules?
Well, I was just going to jump in and I really just wanted to reiterate what was said about reciprocity. Thank you for even bringing that up, because I think really the reality that we need to walk into is farming hasn't been based in reciprocity. And I think that's why in these spaces, when these terms are used, I think what's being spoken about is the actual cultural and spiritual narratives of reciprocity, the holistic definition of it. And I think what agriculture has done, and what specifically regenerative agriculture has done, is reduced it down into practices that are satisfactory if you're doing one thing and only one thing only. Meanwhile, so a great example is I've worked on regenerative farms where they are doing these regenerative practices, but are they actually practicing these same thoughts with any animal, period, human beings included? Are they actually making sure that the culture and the spirit of the farm, of the team, of the work is actually rooted in the reciprocity? Or are we going to launch into another agricultural industrial complex of one co-opting an indigenous word, another co-opted indigenous thing, and then using that co-option to then create an industry? So I just want to like ground in the reality that we are not operating in reciprocity at all. Like agriculture itself is a very destructive force that we are now dependent on. So for us to really acclimate into real reciprocity, it's going to require discomfort on all levels for all of us across the board. In order for that to be a real reality, we're going to have to move out of the notions that we've been in. Now, those of us who have lived on the front lines, on the migrant farm trail, we know this reality, so we're ready. We know what we've been on the bottom, so we're not looking for comfort. But I just really wanted to make sure that that narrative of reciprocity was really being understood as much as it can be understood right now. Because I totally get what you're speaking of, Ariel. Like, I totally get it and I totally hear it. But once again, this like commitment to talking without actually figuring out what we're gonna do, we have to, that was 2020 as a whole for us, and we have to move out of this, whatever we're in.
Can I ask you a follow-up, Amber, about I heard you say that you are not, those of you who have been on the front are not looking for comfort. And so I just heard that. And I mean, I feel like that says a lot right there. But my follow-up is around reciprocity, and you're not looking for comfort.
When I say comfort, I'm talking about comfort in terms of like first world living.
Okay.
I'm saying that there are folks who are already living in alignment, in actual reciprocity, because that is what's required. You have to live with the land when you're on it. So there are folks that are there because they have to be there because the commitment is to the land for a season, for whatever amount, whatever it is. But when I say comfort, I mean, right now we're living in a world where we're talking about climate change, but everything that we're doing isn't reflective. We're still in the same comfort that caused it.
Mm-hmm.
So like
we're not ready to change how we live, period. Like we're not, like, you know, simple.
We're still talking about it. And I'm wondering what it looks like for us to just move in a direction of doing more about it. That isn't digital. That involves a in-person. I'm actually with people. I'm actually with kin. Like the commitment. Because the farmer, as y'all probably know, is committed. But it's about taking the commitment as far as we can get it. But we can't sit and think that by sitting on computers, the thing that caused climate change, that we're gonna, like, we have to get clear on how we're gonna move forward as a people. And this has been said by all of the great leaders of all different colors before us. And I think it's time for that commitment. But when I say comfort, I'm talking about the how we define comfort. That looks very different for somebody who's living with the land. That looks very different for a farm worker.
I think what I hear you saying, that we need to, at least what I hear, like we need to get off the computers and be on the land. And while I do believe it's been said by many people before, I think it is, I can only speak for myself, a lot of it is the first time of hearing it, I think real time, and from someone who looks like me, and that that this just really isn't working. And there's been a belief and an indoctrination in so many of us that this is workable. That what we've been doing. I saw a documentary about somebody who left their religion, and I think that to leave the practices we've done before, we're leaving our religions, many of us, and we have to decide if we're willing to pay that cost. And so what I hear is you bringing that up. Okay. I want to make sure, did we have questions? And thank you, Amber. Like, I appreciate you saying what needs to be said. Selfishly for me, my head is tingling because some of it is new, as far as like really believing it, like, oh, this is where we're at. So to Ariel, is there anything else you would like to leave us with? And then we'll have a question I'll follow up with Jules and Amy and make sure I've covered everything. But I want to, Ariel, hear anything that you would like us to take away from this.
Yeah, I'm really sitting deeply with what Amber is bringing today and around this, like, we need to move past conversations and we need to implement. And it's so true. I don't know, I had so many mentors who are Indigenous women, who are Indigenous peoples, and I've heard so many of them say how tired they are of just talking about doing things and not actually doing things. And I had the honor of meeting a really great Indigenous Maori scholar who had spoke about his work that he's been doing in relationship to Indigenous land stewards in both New Zealand and Australia. And really, really sad truth that he shared was this quote from a native tribal chief from here in the States, who was essentially talking about how tiring and how frustrating it is that, he had this moment of realization when he was in negotiation with the US federal government that his father and his grandfather and his great-great-grandfather had all sat in rooms similar to him negotiating with the federal government, having the same exact conversations, that this is just a cycle repeating itself, and that there's always this continued oppression, that there's always this continued need to renegotiate terms of our sovereignty, of our identity, of our ways of life to ensure that we can continue to exist in the world. And how there's just never this moment where it's like, yeah, of course you have the right to live. Of course you have the right to land. Of course you have the right to breathe. And it's always that there always has to be these negotiations with the federal government for us to be able to live and exist in this world. And that was super sobering for me to just realize, like, wow, he's right. My own ancestors had these same conversations with other federal entities about the same things, and we're never actually able to act further than that. And we're always in conversations with people. And for me, that feels heavy for a lot of different reasons. And it also feels frustrating because at the conference at the summit I was just attending, there was a speaker who had made a comment about, we didn't know better then, but we're doing it now. And I remember, like, just a little before he said that, he had defined who we was, and he said, we is all of us in this room. And then when he made that comment, I was like, we is not everyone in this room. We as settler colonizers, because we knew better. We've been saying it since day one, since you set foot on these lands, since you stole people and brought them here. We knew that your way of life was destructive. We knew that your way of life was toxic, that it was harmful, that it was rooted in this way of life that just took and took and took and took and took until nothing was left. And we've been saying that ever since then. We've been telling you to stop. We've been saying you're taking too much. You're hurting us. You're hurting our people. You're hurting the land. You're hurting our waters. And still, someone had the audacity to say, we didn't know better. We didn't know. And to me, that's what's really exhausting, is it's not only that the burden of this work gets put on us, it's also that the solutions that we have are what we had 500 years ago. And if it was just then, if we were able to, I don't know, convince settler colonizers then that was the way that they should live, like how much different would the world look right now? But no, like anything and anyone who wasn't white was inherently a savage, was inherently less than. And that continues to be perpetuated today. I still have conversations that to just be able to say why I deserve to live. Like every day is a battle, especially in academia. And as much as everyone around right now is using the terms DEI and justice and liberation, at the end of the day, that's still DEI for white people. And it's not necessarily justice and liberation for Black and brown bodies. And yeah, I'm really tired of it. Understandably so.
Yeah, understandably. It is something for me, is like, it's hard for me to celebrate like some new thing that I'm given, because it's taken away from like, I should have always had it. Like, I'm not really wanting to celebrate right now. And so, I mean, that is what I hear from both of you. And that is, as we're putting a pause on this conversation, so we can all of us who have not thought about it, can think about what are the things that can do that are not just on this screen. So I want to thank all of you for coming today, for listening. I believe that Amy dropped links to both Amber and Ariel's bios, and you can find out more about their individual work and how to support that. And if you can, and someone who can, one of the best ways to help is financial, if you have that extra. So go ahead, and that is a wonderful way. I tell people all the time, yes, drop a little something in there so that I can continue to do what I'm doing. Not for me, for them.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
I thought we were going till 6:30. Are we ending at 6?
Oh, are we? Am I ending early? Did I rush it? I am so sorry. I get so nervous of like honoring people's time that I don't ever want to go late. Oh, woo! Look at that. We got 30 more minutes, ladies. Thank you, Ariel, for asking that. Okay, so we're not wrapping anything. Do we have any? Let me take a deep breath. Okay. As I reset just a little bit, first of all, thank you, Amber and Ariel, for just sharing all this. I especially say thank you because you have talked about the heaviness of it and the reminder that we have been here before. We've been talking about this before. So what are the actions? And so thank you for that. Are there any questions in there? Anything that was coming up as I tried to rush both of you ladies off of the stage for no reason that came up? Let's see. No, there's nothing. So
I think, Ariel, you had your hand up before I did, so I will lower my hand.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking tonight. My question is about the taking action immediately, or ASAP, right? Which is what I desire to do. So I'm actually waiting to hear the results of an interview with a land trust that I applied to work with them, and they have have recently swiftly become very interested in DEI and gotten grant money for that. And so this position would be laying groundwork, as they say, for things to change in the future. And I would like to be positioned to return land or to provide land to people of color. So my question is, like, this 3-year grant funded position that is supposedly going to get us there, like, is this action now, or is it feeding into the same nonprofit industrial complex? You know what I'm saying? And I don't expect you guys to answer it, but that's what I'm struggling with right now. Thank you.
I just want to take a moment to honor the braveness of that question, because that is exactly the complexity within itself. Like, that is actually the question that we're all asking as a people right now, because even the position being grant funded alludes to the complexities that we're in, where everything is waiting on some really rich person to hand it down. And so that's what I mean by, like, this is a real, for someone like me, this is a real complexity, because if I'm in the process right now of waiting for a land trust, literally right now, waiting for a land trust to figure out how long it's going to take for me to be on a piece of land. And they're predicting 3 to 5 years. And so the difficult conversation I had early today is, as a seasonal farm worker, what am I supposed to do for 3 to 5 years while I wait for all of the donors to be convinced by my story, by my Blackness, by my womanhood, by the years of youth that I've given up for this, to convince them to finally fund the project that will feed my community? That is exactly the complexities that we're living in. And I personally don't think that there's a clear answer about that. I think there's still a lot of complexities about land trust in general. And I would actually love to hear what Ariel has to say about land trust.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really important one, especially when we think about who gets access to these different spaces and who benefits from from land trusts, and who benefits from nonprofit organizations. And even though the whole idea of having a nonprofit, the whole idea of having a land trust is that you are community driven, that you are supposed to be serving the community, most of the time that's not true. Most of the time that funding is only held within the nonprofit, and it goes out to everyone else except the community. You provide educational workshops, you provide educational conferences, you provide technical assistance, and you bring all of these external people into those communities to provide the work and to provide that education, as opposed to having people from that community drive the work, as opposed to having that money go to them. And so you're not really feeding those people. You're not the one who's putting food on that person's plate. You're not actually contributing to their financial well-being, which in this capitalistic world, we all desperately need. And that's what, nonprofits are such a tricky place to be in. And there are some that operate better than others. And yet we are all still perpetuating this continual cycle of what Amber is alluding to, and what Amber has said, of having someone with the money have the benevolence to give it to you. And that is a horrible place to live in. And that is a horrible relationship to have. And to be able to have to wait for someone to either have the goodness in their heart. And most of the time it's not that. Most of the time it's because Amber's Black, and because I'm Native, because I have a different skin color, because I'm a woman. And it's coming from all of these other intentions that only seek to tokenize us, that only seek to benefit from us, and in no way actually benefit us as people. And I find myself wanting to wrestle a little bit more with the question and with what Amber posed earlier around what does land access mean to people, and why is there only 2 routes for you to access it if you're not born into it, or if you don't have the privilege to be able to have it inherently. And to me, that feels like such a tricky space, especially because, I mean, when we think about reparations and we think about truth and reconciliation, all of that power is still held by the state or federal government to be able to make that decision of who gets land. And they've taken that opportunity away from us. And even as tribes, federally recognized tribes, our land is held in trust by the government. And so we technically don't own our lands. That land is held by the US government. We just hope that we're not going to face termination at the hands of the government. And we hope that it's going to be held in perpetuity, and that the government's actually going to follow through on that. But just 2 years ago, there was a tribe who was terminated. It's the first time it's happened since the termination era. And that was a huge, sobering thing to happen and for tribes to witness. And so many people rallied with them and showed up and stood in solidarity. But at the end of the day, our own rights and privileges that we have as Indigenous peoples, though we know them as inherent, government can decide to take that away, snap of their finger, and it's all gone. There goes the reservation. Like, to understand that breadth of it, like that's a reality that I always pretend doesn't exist, even though it's literally right there. That at any moment in time, all of our land base can be gone. That any moment in time, all of the resources that we have could be taken away from us, that we could not have access to healthcare, that we could not have access to housing, that's how close we are to losing all of it. And I'm really feeling what Amber's giving us today, of seeing the way in which this cycle of capitalism, of patriarchy, of white supremacy, it trickles down, and how it's so deeply rooted in the way that we engage with each other, and in the way that we continue to do land stewardship, and the way that we continue to do food systems and food sovereignty. And the question is then, how do we break out of that? And how do we dismantle those systems of oppression? And how do we move away from something that is so massive like that, where it's across the world?
Absolutely. Again, thank both of you. A question that came in that kind of follows right after that, and thank you, Jules, was some questions are, can we have true liberation under capitalism? And if not, what does dismantling capitalism look like in practice? And I think, nonprofit is part of capitalism. Just real quick, I worked for a nonprofit last year and I wrote grants. When you talk about that heavy work too, we constantly have to relive, why do we need this money? I actually talked to one of my colleagues today and I said, why can't we just say because? Just because, like, I don't have it in me to relive my pain again on why this money. So nonprofits are part of capitalism. And so these things are intertwined. And do we have, I thank you, Amber, but it's really, when it talks about comfort and first world and those things, can farming live with our comfort? What America has defied is the American dream. Can farming live in that, in this world we set up, is I believe really what that question goes down to. And there's some other great ones, but those two I would like to start off with.
Yeah, I just want to respond, because I think we all And I had to have my harsh reality check in 2018 about this, but I think farming as a whole concept was never, like, it was never good.
Mhm.
Everything that farming is based off of historically has nothing to do with good. It really didn't get to an apex of good until it became feeding the troops overseas for the war. Or once we had folks like Fannie Lou Hamer that came up and said, well, I want to utilize farming to support my community. But really the history of agriculture is really nothing good. And it's absolutely a system that we should have never said yes to. But we have to flip that because we now depend on it. There's really no other way for folks, the magnitude of folks on the planet, to be fed without this system. So I just really just want us to, like, agriculture is capitalism. And I think that's something that folks have never wanted to say. And we know this when we look at the history of agriculture in America and see how it was based off of slavery. It is capitalism within itself. I think what we need to name is, how can growing food just be something that supports people? How do we decommodify this act of support? Because taking leaves and putting monetary value on something that's living its own life, this is another form of oppression. So all we did in the last 600 years is say, we are no longer, we now value the human, but we still don't value the land and the plant being itself. That's the only thing that we've really done. So I just want to, like, name that when agriculture and capitalism are not separate entities. That is one entity that created everything that we are involved in today. What we need to do is name, how can we set up systems that are just for folks to have land access, grow their food, and support their community. But in that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around the spirit and the culture of the work, because it cannot just be reliant on the practices themselves. That's what we just saw regenerative agriculture try and do for 3 years. And it is absolutely, they are not crossing the line because they're still not conscious of the white culture that they are creating inside of the concept that is regenerative agriculture. So it really comes down to, like, we need to talk about culture versus collective, because if we look at the collective, we see that farmers of color everywhere are saying the same thing. When we go to a food sovereignty level, the global South is going through the same thing everywhere. But culturally, what I would need and what Ariel would need would be different. So, like, we need to get grounded on what is the culture of the work, not the value. We're living, land access has been living so much in value and monetary and money, and it needs to come out of that. Now, what that actually looks like, I'm just as confused with y'all, and have been strategizing for almost a decade trying to figure out, how can we actually do this?
Yeah, it's a really big question. And I'll take you back home for a second to give an example of what is a world without capitalism. And because we live that in Cookit, in Cochiti, and we live that with my people. And it's not that there's, yeah, I'll just start there. And so we're fortunate and we're blessed to still live on the ancestral lands of my people. We don't have all of it, but we still live in the land that we were given by the Creator and that we were held responsible to steward for as long as we exist. And in my community, we work together in a way that is a collective. And when I say the collective, it means understanding that every single person in the tribe contributes in a meaningful way to the long-term health of our people. It means that we honor elders. It means that we respect the voices of children. It means that we center women. It means that we understand our responsibilities to the beings around us. It means that we act in a way that supports natural law, that supports natural processes, that it's them first before us, because we know that in our creation stories, humans, we are the last one to make it into this world. Everything else came before us. And so when you work from that way of life, then you know that the deer have been here longer, that it's grandfather's son, that it's the way in which you have this kinship model with the world around you. And so, and thinking about what does the world look like without capitalism, that when things happen in the village, we do it together. When there's a feast day, we're all preparing food together, that we're all doing the work together, that we're all feeding each other. When there's a death in the village, when someone passes on to the next life, we all come together, we mourn together, we breathe our air together, and we celebrate their life, because we understand that they may be gone from this plane, but they continue in another life, and that they continue in other spaces, that they're still with us. And we also operate from this space that we know that we're just trying to be good ancestors, that we're thinking about future generations, that we're thinking about the ones who are to come after us, that every decision we make, they will hold us accountable to in the future. And those are all values that don't go that far-fetched, to think about future generations, to think about, to treat the land as a relative, to imagine helping people because you know it's right, not because you're trying to benefit from it in some way, but you know inherently that it's right to provide for your neighbor, to provide for your sister, your brother, your aunt, your uncle, your relatives. But for some reason, those concepts seem so far-fetched to people. Like, it feels so, when I explain this, everyone's like, wow, you have a really tight-knit community. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know any other way to have a community. What does your community look like if it's not like this? And capitalism teaches you that you should only care about yourself, that you should only care about your immediate family, that it's you versus the world. And that's not true. And that's not the way that we were supposed to live as people. It was very, very rare that any indigenous peoples before settler colonialism lived in isolation. We have stories of trading with people all the way in what's now known as California, of people all the way down south in Chile, all the way up north to Canada. That's how far our people ventured. That's how far our people exchanged in knowledge and culture, in food, in crafts. That is the scale that we had already lived in prior before. And so, yes, like there's this need for it to be locally driven, and this acknowledgement that there's ways to still be in community, to still be in reciprocity with people who are far away from you. And so that's just, yeah, for some reason, that always feels so far-fetched and so hard for people to just lean into the way in which we're supposed to be in this world.
Well, I don't know if anyone else on the call other than Amber and Ariel, that it really sunk in that capitalism and agriculture are the same, and that, you know, the system was never supposed to be this way. And I think I know that, but I don't think I've seen it as much, as clearly as I did as a farming, is that, or being a land steward has taught me more about the world I grew up in than anything else, because I I think it was to Amber saying, the cost of us quantifying like what a leaf, a whole living thing is, and just to feed people. I had no idea that people just did not. I thought there was like scarcity, and I realized it is not scarcity. It's a system that built scarcity. If things were done in the way that we would all have enough to eat, and we would not need nonprofits. And so that conversation, oops, I lost my light, folks. Uh-oh. Let's see. I may have a backup or not. We may have weird lighting. Let's see what we got here. Oh, look at that. Thank you for that. Little technical difficulties. Now it's mood lighting. But what I was saying is that the idea that agriculture as it is the same as capitalism, and separating is not possible. So, and then thank you, Ariel, for pointing out that there is a life without capitalism. It can be done. Like communities all over the world, but we're speaking specifically to the indigenous communities here, had done that historically. And it was the reminder that there was a before time, a before the colonizers' time, where people interacted. I recently had a classmate, and I think he could count back 5 grandmothers, and she remembered a time before, and these stories have been passed down. And I never had heard it. I had never heard the history of America told in that way. I think that is, again, while you stated, Ariel, that you know that the humans were the last to get here, right? Like, even, again, another thing to point out, that like it's not centered around us. It is not, the human show, that it is the animals and the land that came before us, that this land existed before everything was done through a capitalist view. So it can be done. How do we get to healing that? So thank both of you for pointing that out. I want to grab a couple more questions. I think this is from you, Ariel. The movement to payments for ecosystem services and capitalism at work for those from a natural resource background. Is that from you?
Yeah, that was just like a quick
Okay.
other, like
Okay.
another way to contextualize what ecosystem services are.
Well, thank you. Again, this is work I care about, and I still learn every single day that there's a different way for me to do it. And thank you so much.
I'm wondering, I know that we have about 4 minutes left. And so the question you asked earlier, and maybe it's worth doing one more quick check-in.
Yes, please.
Amber, I invite you if there's last thoughts that you want to share before we end.
No, I think we have created a really great spectrum of what the realities are right now. And the one thing I always wish for is just for more time and the ability to share more perspectives. So I guess my closing thought is that, like, I would really encourage folks to diversify who their farming network is. Like, I would really encourage folks to speak to a conventional farmer, speak to an organic farmer, speak to a regenerative farmer. That's been the gift of this work and moving to so many places, is being able to capture the spectrum of experience, regardless of where one is in agriculture, the toughness of it. But yeah, I just would love to thank you, Ariel, for your vulnerability and your truth. And thank y'all for listening.
Thank both of you. I apologize. I was so like in to those last answers. I was like, what? It's over. Wait, I tried to get it early and now I'm trying to stay late. So thank you, Ariel, for catching me up. And I'm the moderator. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amber and Ariel. Everyone has, Jules and Amy have dropped links for you to follow up with them. Please follow up with WFAN to, of course, keep in the loop for more opportunities to hear diverse perspectives. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you let this marinate, let some seeds, and ask those questions, but also action. So thank you very much. And I believe that closes us out. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much.